All right, Glock 19 Gen 5. This is something that you can do with any Gen Glock, but this is the best Glock trigger setup that I've ever had the pleasure of shooting. I have played around with a lot of Glock triggers. I've played around with some very light ones that weren't that reliable, and I've played around with this now for a long time. I've got a couple thousand rounds through this setup as configured, and this is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Glock. More specifically, Glock triggers. The rest of the stuff that I've done to this gun has improved it a lot, but I really just want to talk to you about this trigger setup today. So at the heart of this trigger setup is the agency trigger shoe and trigger bar. This changes some of the geometry of the actual trigger pull, which will improve the overall feel and travel, over travel, and pre-travel significantly. So I'll show you this and then I'll compare it to a DR920, which is dog crap. But if we take a look here, here's the agency. So once you defeat the trigger blade safety, there is basically zero take up and a rolling wall. I really prefer a rolling wall as opposed to a really hard defined spot, because what that allows me to do is slap the trigger. I can, on this gun, just smash through the trigger without influencing the gun nearly as much as if when I'm shooting fast, if I hit a hard defined wall, I find that what that causes is I'm pulling quickly, smoothly to the rear, but quickly, and then I hit that point where all of a sudden now force is put into the gun. But on this, since it just moves really smoothly through it, I can pull the trigger very fast, and it allows me to shoot quickly without influencing the gun negatively. So, agency trigger shoe with some internal work done to it. Stock, like, man, this is a stock DR920. Now, the reset on this is very positive, but I'm gonna do the trigger pull weight on this Wheeler digital scale. So that was 3 pounds, 6 ounces. That was the 5th trigger pull that I did of this, with an average of 3 pounds, 5.9 ounces. Fantastic. Now you're wondering, is it just the trigger shoe? No, it's not just the trigger shoe. The trigger shoe does a whole lot when it comes to the overall trigger movement, when it comes to the pre-travel and over-travel. There's not nearly as much over-travel with this. So the trigger breaks and then I can't even really perceive any extra. There's like, I can sort of see that it moves a little bit further, but barely at all. So the trigger shoe and the trigger bar does a lot, but really what's doing a lot of the heavy lifting is the Taran Tactical competition level kit. The competition kit from Taran Tactical is a variety of springs and a connector for the Glock trigger. Those alone run maybe less than 50 bucks. I think I got it from Ben Stoger Pro Shop, and it's fantastic. Now, it does replace the firing pin striker, or the striker spring, which you might find that on some rounds, it doesn't pop really hard primers. But like I said, I've got about 2,000 rounds through this gun with this current setup and haven't had any issues. I've shot like 7 different types of standard 9mm range ammo and at least 2 different types of defensive ammo with no problems whatsoever. So the competition kit replaces the springs inside of the trigger, the striker spring and the striker safety spring that block the firing pin block spring, and it reduces the trigger pull down to less than 3.5 pounds, just less than. Yours probably will end up be like 3.5 because I've got a lot of rounds through this gun, so a lot of the contact points have been smoothed out over time. But if you put the agency shoe with the Taran Tactical spring kits like I did, you will likely be expecting about a 3.5 pound trigger pull on a Glock, which is phenomenal. That is lighter than some 2011s, and this gun has been perfectly reliable with all of the ammo that I've put through it. and I feel like I've put enough to really talk about this. Now, is this something that I would recommend for the average person? Probably not. Is this sick as hell? Yes. Does this make my Glock significantly easier to shoot? Yes. Does it make it more enjoyable to shoot? Yes. Has it been reliable? Yes. However, if you run into issues with this not setting off primers, what you can do is get a Wolf striker spring. I think the factory striker spring on a Glock is like 6 pounds or 5.5 pounds. If you split the difference between the 4 and the 6 with this gun, with like a 5-pound striker spring, I think you could have a slightly heavier trigger, but potentially more reliability if you find that you run into reliability issues. Is the 4-pound spring likely to wear out sooner and eventually get to a point where I get light strikes? Maybe, but I swap the springs on the internals of my carry guns, which this is, fairly often. So I think that if you don't want as light of a trigger, but you want a fantastic smooth pull that has a really smooth break to it, this is unbeatable. This is the best Glock trigger setup that I've ever used. So 3 pounds, 6 ounces. I'm gonna now do this piece of junk. Okay, I'm at the wall and I'm already at 5 pounds. I'm creeping through the wall, 5.5 pounds, 5 pounds, 7.6 ounces. I'm just gonna delete that and not add it to the total. 5 pounds, 10 ounces. This trigger, the factory trigger in the DR920, is just simply unacceptable in my opinion. £5 pounds, 13 ounces. It's just getting worse, folks. I'm gonna do this one off screen just so I can hold it stable so some of you don't complain. 5 pounds, 14 ounces. We're just going up. It's all uphill from here. Okay, that one, oh, I forgot to hit delete on that. £5 pounds, 8 ounces, 7.9 ounces. So yeah, it's Shadow Systems trigger, doo-doo. Glock trigger, fantastic. Glock trigger with a lot of swaps to it, fantastic. If you're looking for a Glock trigger, I highly recommend the Agency shoe and trigger bar. It's a drop-in part that is an improvement, but it won't change the weight a whole lot. It'll change it a little bit because it's changing the geometry of the angles and it's changing some of the pre-travel and over-travel, but really what's doing a lot of the heavy lifting here is that Taran Tactical kit. And now I know, if you're familiar with my lore, that might seem funny to you, but I buy things that are good. Sometimes doing that means you buy something that might seem weird to buy from them. In this instance, this trigger, because of what I've done to it, is just beautiful. It's fantastic. I love it. Taran did a great job designing this setup, or whoever designed it, the company themselves, they did a great job. This trigger's fantastic. Check it out.